welcome to a very special episode of Midlife Krisis.
And somber.
Today, it's very important that I get these very hard to say words off my chest and out into the public. And they are as follows. Thank you so much for allowing me that time and that dignity. Okay. So, as you all can tell, the soundboard is not going anywhere.
I think our subscriber list is going down by the soundbite.
Really?
No, please, no.
I don't know. Right. Okay, so we are here to. So something interesting happened that spurned the topic of today's episode.
Yes.
Which is that we are going to discuss developers that we loved or liked a lot, doesn't matter, that were once a thing and are no longer here. But the irony of that, Uncle Bob, is that what made me think of this was the fact that the developer for Sony's Concord was finally and mercifully shut down.
Well, I wouldn't say finally. It all happened pretty fast.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. They did. Well, it went from like 5 years developing a game, game coming out, and then like 2 weeks later, people losing their jobs, and then like a game being like literally swept under the rug before everyone's very eyes.
As far as I know, I mean, you're better in terms of the encyclopedic knowledge of the industry than I am, but this is somewhat unprecedented that a game with this kind of development budget, this kind of scope and scale gets released, gets shut down within 2 weeks of its release, and then the developer gets canned, I think, 3 weeks after that. I mean, it was remarkable speed that it went from, this is going to be a $200 million budget game, and that's been confirmed by a few different sources. So $200 million investment to, we're shutting this game down less than 2 weeks after it's made, and we're shutting the developer down just a few weeks after that.
Yeah.
I mean, incredible and I mean, there have been game failures, including some pretty high-profile failures this year. Like the Justice League one is probably the most notable among those. But Rocksteady Studios is still a studio, and they are still operating, and they're working on some other game right now.
For now. Yeah, for now.
For now, yes. But to have this developer shut down and this game shut down, I thought, I don't know if we talked about this or you saw any of the data on this. Because they shut the game down so quickly, I was like, how many people got the Platinum Trophy?
Oh, do tell. How many people do have this Platinum Trophy?
I believe it was like fewer than 100.
Okay.
ever got it. And even that seems high to me.
People already, like, you can go on eBay right now and, of course, see sealed copies of this game that are, like, they're not selling, but people are having them up there for, like, $89, $99, because they think that this is going to be, like, a collector's piece because of the historical value behind it. No, I'm not saying, of course it could be. Like, a lot of really bad video games are worth hundreds and thousands of dollars today.
Wasn't it the most expensive 32X game was a Spider-Man game, right? That was terrible.
Yeah, it's called Web of Fire. And back when you were hearing about it, it was like an expensive game, like $300-400. Now it's thousands.
Is it really?
Oh yeah, it
was 250. That's what I remember.
Yeah, no, it's over 1,000 now.
Oh man.
Yeah, which is like, well, I mean, at some point we're going to talk about this. But yeah, video game collecting, like every other collector market in a post-COVID thing, it's just bonkers nuts. It happened to sports cards. It happened to Pokemon cards, like
Magic the Gathering.
all of that shit. Yeah.
And
markets just haven't figured out like what the real wavelength of everything actually is. But anyway, back to this shit show that is Concord. It's important for me to note that at $200 million, Concord was roughly 1.35 water worlds in budget. And that, if you think about it in those terms, is a pretty sobering fact.
Yeah.
From moment one, from second one, I couldn't have given less of a shit about a video game. And what's kind of surprising to me, though, is that so my taste is I would say is on the more eclectic side, especially in video games. I can certainly get down on a GTA or a Call of Duty.
Elden Ring.
Yeah, of course. But by and large, like I tend to Like stay in the lower streams, and then every once in a while dip up into the mainstream.
I would say it a little differently. I think you play everything.
Okay.
And you like a lot of stuff that the mainstream likes, but you also like a lot of stuff that is really weird and niche or old or some combination thereof.
Okay.
So it's not. I think your tastes for what's popular are largely consistent with what other people think is popular. Okay. Not entirely, but largely. But some of the games that I like, I'm a gamer, and 3/4 of the games that we do on Let's Plays, I've never heard of. Right. Not just haven't played. I didn't know these games exist in the universe. And you're like, this game is so great. It's just so weird.
It's very influential.
Yeah.
But one of the things that took me by surprise is that how large of a group it turned out to be that also looked at this game and was like, oh, no, absolutely not. I will not be playing this. Yeah. And it came out at, it's like $40. So like they did something a little weird there where they were charging for like what everyone saw as a free-to-play game, but it wasn't a free-to-play game.
Correct.
And then the hook was like, well, they have every week or it was either every week or every month. Like, you're going to see a new cutscene. And people were like, nope, I skipped those. So why is that an incentive for me to go check this thing out?
So there's two components to this game. There's a gameplay component, and then there's the lore, visual aesthetic component. Sony put this, I believe they put it as like the first or final trailer of one of their states of play. And it was like a 6 or 7 minute like intro to the game, including a 3-minute cutscene. And the cutscene, as has been said over and over and over again, looks very like Guardians of the Galaxy-esque. Yes. And nobody was really into that because it's like we've already seen this universe done better by Disney in some form.
And even that, I'll even argue that by the end of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, I think 3 of them, right? Yeah. By the end of that, like, it had seemed that even the Guardians of the Galaxies had kind of worn out its welcome.
Totally.
By that point.
Yes, because it's like we've been down this road before. So you've got that. So that it's like we're already. It's like I don't need this in my life. The writing isn't that clever. The characters aren't that original. Then they show the gameplay, and it's like, oh, another hero shooter, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, is this going to be different than Overwatch or Fortnite or any of the 67,000 other hero shooters? And it's just, we see this in games over and over again. At some point, Brian, you and I are just going to rule the world of games, and we will decide when something is oversaturated.
And Time Killers gets another sequel. Let's do it.
We've talked about this before, where we would go to E3, circa 2006 or 7, and it's like literally every game there was going to be an MMO.
Yeah.
And even games that had no business being an MMO. It's like, oh, everybody's on the MMO train now. Okay, fine. Then there was the mobile gaming train. There was the MOBA train. And then most recently now there's the hero shooter train, which is also kind of overlaps with the live service train.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And it always happens the same. It gets oversaturated. There's only room for 2 or 3 players, maybe sometimes not even 2. And then you've got to innovate somewhere else. And when Sony decided that they were going to put all their chips into live service games, and this was one of those chips, boy, did they back the wrong horse.
Well, so it's interesting you mentioned that too, because it's one of those horses, so to speak, that actually went through every checkpoint and made it out the door.
Yeah, this is an out the door horse.
Yeah, this is an out the door horse.
This isn't even like the multiplayer game that Naughty Dog was working on that got canceled.
Yes.
That probably would have been similar to this in terms of at least the gameplay elements of it. So, just a spectacular failure that is the culmination of a series of bad decisions that could have been seen from anybody who's in the trenches playing games every day like we are.
Yep.
Could have been seen from miles away. Somebody could have told the suits at Sony, like, this aesthetic is way played out and is not going to engender love amongst gamers. And then also this gameplay sucks also. Not that it sucks, but it's just we saw this in 2016 with Overwatch. That was 8 years ago. What new are you bringing to the table? The answer is nothing. It's like, okay, so don't be surprised. Oh, and by the way, every other game like this is free, and you're expecting people to go out and pay money for this?
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, it's like going to like the 99-cent store and like looking at the wrestling figures. This is something that I've done my entire adult life. But you would find
bend the narrative to conform to your own personal experience.
I live my life a certain way, and this is how it's done. But you would find these guys that looked exactly like Eddie Guerrero, whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
And like like that's who this is. But then the package said like Dr. Thunder or something like that. And I feel like that's what this game is. It's like, yeah, it kind of looks like Eddie Guerrero a little bit, but like they forgot to paint the eyebrows.
Right.
And also it's at the bottom of this like fucking dust pile at a 99-cent store. Because no one wants this garbage.
Or my version of the story, you go to the grocery store to buy your Dr. Pepper, and instead they have Dr. Thunder there. And you're like, it's not the same. I know it's the same, but it's not the same.
Yeah, it's just not the same. Two very different, yet very similar Dr. Thunders.
Both very unhealthy.
Yes. Well, I think it's kind of a legendary thing that's happened with Sony in this game.
Yeah.
And certainly a course correction. It sucks that people are losing their jobs and shit like that, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know how... It's crazy to me that it got as far as it did without someone being like, hey, oh, shit, like, we need to stop this.
Well, and think about that poor studio. The studio hadn't made a game. It was founded and started working on this game.
Yeah, it was a ex-Bungie guy founded a studio, then the studio that made Concord was like a spin-off of that studio, as I understand it.
And then so they get investment, and then Sony takes a look at their game, and it's like, well, this looks really good. And then Sony just buys the studio. And if you're the founder of the studio, you're like, well, that worked out pretty well. I just founded the studio, and then I just sold it, and now I'm a millionaire because Sony just paid me millions of dollars to own the studio.
Right.
The downside, though, is that when Sony buys the studio, they now own it, and they can close it, and that's exactly what they did.
Right.
So here today, gone tomorrow. Garbage in, garbage out. So, I mean... I guess that whoever made the studio will be crying themselves to sleep with their $100 bills that they got from the Sony purchase. But at the same time, talk about like not leaving a mark in the industry.
Yeah, no kidding, man.
Form a studio.
Oh, it left a mark, all right.
That's true. Walk right into that.
Yeah, big time. But yes, ironically, all of this shit is what made me think of talking about developers that are no longer around that were good, as it turns out.
Good topic.
So I'll start, friend, because the first developer I'm going to be talking about, they kind of came back, but their big coming out product was, in a way, the worst fucking wrestling video game that you can buy on the market today. But I'll get to that when I get to it.
It can't. Okay. It's not that one.
It's not this one. It is absolutely not this one. But this is who we're talking about. So this is. I'll go back to the. Actually, you know what? No, let's do this. Boom! There they are. So this is the first of the AKI or AKI N64 wrestling games. AKI they were around, I think, a little bit in the 16-bit era too. Go ahead. They were a spin-off of a company called ASMIC, and ASMIC made a lot of Super Famicom games and stuff like that back in Japan. But anyway, if I could, and I would, so I will, let's jump into a little bit of a time machine here. The year is 1997, and we're just buzzing out of our minds on cold cheeseburgers and Mountain Dew.
Definitely.
And playing 4-player WCW versus NWO World Tour. And friend, I got to tell you, there are not so many video game memories that live up to that one, even to this day.
Yeah.
Very recently, myself, you, a couple other friends were over here. We were imbibing in a couple cold adult beverages, and we played this game 4 players, and it was just so much fucking fun.
Fantastic.
Remember Sting running around the ring, just pulling people by the ankles out, and then smashing them over and over.
The chair shots over and over.
So much fun. So AKI, their whole run, I'm going just off the top of my head here, but their first game that they developed, if I remember right, was WCW World Tour for the PlayStation. Then they jumped over and did N64 development. So you have this one, then you have WCW versus NWO Revenge, which was the sequel.
Yeah.
Then they jumped licenses, and as WCW's popularity kind of waned, WWF's popularity went through the roof, and then this company, which made the quote-unquote good wrestling games, got that license. So then they took over and did WrestleMania 2000, and then WWF No Mercy, which WWF No Mercy is kind of considered the great big dog of the yard in terms of these N64 wrestling games.
I didn't know that.
So for my money, my personal favorite is still this guy of the American released AKI games. But I will say, engine-wise, that No Mercy game is really, really, really incredible. And the Japanese counterpart of that game is called Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, which that to me is the big be all end all, like the double ultimate pro wrestling video game is that game, and it's Japanese only N64. So after this run of million selling, super popular wrestling, and people bring up the N64 as like, man, what a really shitty system, but goddamn, those wrestling games are good. It's one of those things.
Playing this game and then Revenge specifically, and it felt like an actual revolution in playing a wrestling game or even just sports games. And I'm able to do stuff in here that it was like, I can actually do that. You can do chair shots. They have the entire, I don't know if it was the entire roster, but it felt like almost the entire roster. And by the time they got to Revenge, I think it was the entire roster.
It was, if not the entire roster, like pretty damn close. Although you got to remember with WCW, like saying the whole roster, like there's, you get stories about like Lanny Poffo, who like was technically on the roster, but never like for 1 second was on any television program in all of WCW.
I didn't miss him in these games.
Yeah. Well, you're wrong, because he's the genius. And he has over 5,000 poems committed to memory. Anywho, but where I was going with that is like, it was at its time, like I remember just seeing any sort of combat game, like fighting game, wrestling game, whatever. Seeing the amount of people in this particular game was staggering, and it's still kind of staggering.
Yeah, definitely.
And as a wrestling nerd, seeing all of the wrestlers that were in this game, that like, at that time in '97, I was kind of starting to become an online wrestling nerd, which is where all wrestling nerds eventually migrate, like everything else. They migrated and flourished.
All roads lead to
and became,
online forums.
Exactly. And becoming the cancerous tumor that is all internet fandoms. But like at that time, I was starting to like get into Japanese wrestling a little bit, and like being able to like see some of these dudes who I knew, and like they were like given like Hayabusa, one of my favorite Japanese wrestlers of all time. He's in this game, but they call him Habanero. Like just cool little touches like that, where it's like, we know you know who this is, and we're giving him to you, but we're not paying for it, and we're gonna give him this cute little fun name.
And in Revenge, I think you could make your own wrestler. Is that true or not true?
You could basically like swap around, like you can put like an NWO shirt on Chris Jericho, like that kind of thing. You wouldn't be able to get into like real customization options until WrestleMania 2000, and then especially in No Mercy. No Mercy really had the most of the AKI games, the most fleshed out customization. The Acclaim wrestling games, especially after WWF Warzone. So I think that's WWF Attitude, and then the 2 ECW games that they did. They're pure shit. Like they're terrible, terrible wrestling games. At the time, the graphics were pretty, especially like the models, like they were good because they looked like the wrestlers, and you had like these cool little touches where you could see like their chests like expand as they like take breaths and stuff like that. But gameplay wise, it was awful. Like terrible control. You had to do like fighting game moves. None of it made any sense. But those games had really good character customization suites from all the way back from WWF Attitude. But real customization shit comes in the next generation of wrestling games, or Fire Pro Wrestling for us disgusting weirdos out there. But so anyway, like AKI was super successful. They made wrestling games up through until the PS2 GameCube era. They made the 2 Def Jam fighting / wrestling games, which looking by that face tells me you have no idea what I'm talking about. There was a game called Def Jam Recordings Fight for New York. And then,
sounds awesome.
Yeah, then I can't remember the name of the other one, but there are 2 of them. And they are... Oh, and they also made the Ultimate Muscle, which I have up here somewhere. Remember Muscle, the little 80s figures?
Wrestling,
yeah, they made a wrestling game, AKI, with their engine on the GameCube, like cel-shaded, looked just like the cartoon. Fucking incredible! But anyway, so they went on this long-ass run and just kind of go belly up. THQ, the publisher of these, it took a lot longer to go belly up, but eventually they would go belly up too. But that was kind of it for them. Like people kind of bounced around and joined. Ukes is the other real big wrestling developer, and they also do UFC games and stuff, or they were doing UFC games. I think now EA does all those in house. But what brought these guys back is there's a renegade wrestling league out there on the TV waves called AEW. owned by a billionaire. And when you have a wrestling property, I think, and they're smart to do this, the idea is, well, we should probably have a wrestling video game because, there's a lot of 40-year-old men who love video games and pro wrestling. And this is our challenge and our cross to bear. But so then they were all fans of this stuff too, because everybody was. Everyone in our age group that liked wrestling, even casually, played these games, loved these games.
Oh, yeah.
So they kind of resurrected AKI from the ashes. And long story short, a bunch of people who don't really know much about how to be business and produce video game developers tried to do exactly that. And the result is AEW Fight Forever, which...
What year did it come out?
That came out in 2023, I think. It's either 23 or 22.
Okay.
So pretty recent. My plan was always to buy that game when it invariably fell sub $10. I didn't even have to do that because they released it on PlayStation Plus in the poor tier, which I proudly subscribe to as a free game. So I finally checked it out, and I'd heard things online about like how feature deficit it was, and especially in the creator wrestler stuff. And boy, were they not lying! It sucks. It's a really, really, really terrible wrestling game, and it's a company I'm not that big of a fan. Thank you. It sucked in every stretch of the imagination because as you can tell, I love the maker of this game and so many others like it. And when you hear that we're getting the band back together and they're doing the thing that they're so good at for all these years, or for all those years, I should say, and then the product that comes out is I'll take 3 Concords before I take that game. It's a really, really, really bad wrestling game.
But when you say when they're getting the band back together, other than the name, you don't know if it was the same dudes or any of them who actually made
Oh
this
no,
game.
it was absolutely the main guy who made these games, and then his hand-picked team that were all former AKI people. And to the point where they could come out and I think someone else owned the name AKI, but they basically came out and said we're AKI, we're back together, and we're making wrestling games like nature intended. And then they made this game that just fucking sucks.
So what happened?
Well,
did the game pass them by?
The game, there's 2 schools of thought here, and it's who do you blame? Do you blame AKI or do you blame the wrestling company that funded the whole thing? And to me, so the main guy supposedly the main guy who's in charge of the project is a pro wrestler. This guy Kenny Omega, who is a video game nerd and a wrestler, and he was kind of patient zero of those 2 things coming together.
Right. The overlapping Venn diagram.
Video game nerds and pro wrestlers, and he's that guy. So he somehow convinced his boss, the owner of AEW, to let him be in charge of this thing. And he had zero experience at all to do something like that. And then this is kind of the results. The other side of the story is that this AKI team that was kind of ramshackled together, they were all out of practice. They hadn't really done a whole lot of work in the intervening years since AKI folded. And they kind of went at this and wasted a lot of money because they didn't know what they were doing. And we're at a point where they needed more money to finish development. They weren't going to get it because they had blown through the budget that they had. And this game needed to come out in whatever state that it was in. And it came out in a really, really, really bad state.
That second story is a tale as old as time.
Yeah, big time. And I would like to think that it is a nice, healthy cocktail of both. Which I think most likely is, given all the players and all the statistics about it. Yeah. But, so anyway, AKI, that's one of my picks. I will hand it over to you, because I have more props. But I want to hear about one of your developers that shit the bed that is no longer with us.
Well, wait, I got one last question. Because
please.
The episode is about developers that are gone and you're sad that they're gone.
Yeah.
But AKI, or the incarnation of them, released a really shitty video game. So are you still... Do you mourn just the AKI of your youth? Mm-hmm. Because it sounds like this new version of it kind of doesn't... They deserve to die.
So no. What they need is to find a more benevolent billionaire angel investor to give them the money that they need to get them back up to snuff.
Okay.
No, in truth, I think The latter part of the story, I think, is more true. Where I think these guys, a lot of things about game development, maybe pass them by, or maybe in that like, maybe there's just something magical about the N64 that made their wrestling games as good as they were, and they can't. And it was really difficult for them to try to recreate that for a lot of reasons. Like maybe like these games are certainly a product of their time. I will contest that they're still fun to play, and you lived it, you breathed it yourself.
I did.
These games are still fun to play today. So you can't convince me that it isn't possible to use one of these bad boys as your reference point and make a new wrestling game. So I do mourn their loss because they're still kind of gone. It's neat that they came back, but it's I can't argue the product that they made on their comeback it's terrible. Like it's just a really, really bad. It's a bad video game and a worse wrestling game, which is not a spot that you want to be in.
All right, so they need a more benevolent billionaire.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, we happen to know of at least one billionaire who has some time on his hands now and is no longer involved in the World Wrestling Federation.
A kind, elderly old man, an elderly statesman in the in the pro wrestling business.
Highly dignified elderly statesman who could be looking for an investment. All right.
And he could be also looking towards some charges pretty
Well, then
soon.
he'll have even more time on his hands.
That's true.
All right, my game, or my developer, somewhat low-hanging fruit, but I always want to take a chance to make fun of EA when I can.
Sure.
Is Maxis Studios. So Maxis is well known as the developers of almost exclusively SimCity games, but just really Sim something games.
SimAnt, big shout out SimAnt. That was a favorite of mine as a kid.
And mine too. Sim Tower, Sim Copter, Sim, a whole bunch of different Sims. And they started in the late 80s, I think, and it was the creation of one Will Wright, legendary video game creator, designer, inventor of SimCity. And they went all the way through, and that company was a company, even after Will Wright was no longer a part of it, until 2013.
When did Will Wright leave Maxis? Do you remember?
No, don't remember. Okay. And I don't want to say and be wrong. So
always a fair play. It's always a nice, smooth, fair play.
Yeah. Go ahead and Google that, viewers. You'll get your answer. I don't have it.
We don't have a research department, and we never will. Even when the Prince was here, I asked him, will you do some light research? He spit in my face.
And then,
yeah. There we go. always time for a boing and a slip. There we go.
All right, so but by 2013, Will Wright was definitely not a part of it, but EA still owned, obviously, the name, and they set out to make a new SimCity. And they were so confident about it, they were just calling it SimCity, not SimCity 5. It was kind of a reboot, kind of a fresh start, first SimCity game in, at that point, over 10 years. And EA, the publisher, made some really, really bad creative choices with that game. Mm-hmm. Most notably, the requirement that you always have to be online to play the game. And so when the game finally came out, the crush of people, including myself, trying to play it was such that the servers just could not handle all the people trying to build cities at once, and they were down for at least the first several days. And the only way that EA made the game so that the servers could be used was by preventing you from choosing the speed up city development option. So they actually had to turn off a feature that had been a part of every single SimCity game to allow people to play it, including me. And then I told you, somewhat famously in my life, infamously for Maxis, that for a period of I think like 12 hours or something like that, I had the biggest city in the entire universe of SimCity. Because nobody else could play the game, and I miraculously was able to play the game. Mm-hmm. So all that's well and good. Then EA, realizing the mistake that they made, they went and told Maxis, go back and fix this problem, the problem of the always online component. Maxis said, like, well, it's buried really deep within the code, so it's going to take, like, us a year to figure that out. And EA was like, cool, do it. Then they do it. A year later, Maxis is like, hey, EA, it nearly killed us, but we did it. We figured it out. SimCity you don't have to be online anymore. And EA was like, cool, we're shutting the studio down.
Real quick, I have a question about when they shuttered that component of the game, the always online thing.
Yeah.
Wasn't the restriction on building a larger city tied to that? So when they got rid of the persistent online thing, there was no way for them to make it so that you could expand your city beyond that little pat of land that everyone started out with.
That's what I initially thought, and then when I did more research into it, because if you remember, my original criticism was, how in the world could they limit your city size so much in this game? And I thought it was tied to the online thing. And there was some internet scuttle about that. In the interviews that I've seen with the actual developers who made the game, they actually said that it was planned all along to have that restriction put in. Unbelievably, right? Yeah. But more nefariously, so that they could sell you DLC or expansions or whatever that would let you increase the population later on. So it was really a monetization scheme.
Okay.
Where they got you in, they'd have you make a city, and they'd be like, "Hey, you want to take the city to 100,000 people?
Yes.
Buy this
There
DLC, buy this whatever."
Yeah.
And actually, let me hedge on this a little bit. I don't actually know if it was a developer decision to do it that way or an EA decision. I know I've seen developer interviews where they have said that it was intended. Mm-hmm. But again, the developers never intended it to be always online. That was a 100% EA thing. The city population restriction might have also been an EA thing, but it was definitely intended and intended to go away as part of a DLC that they would sell you, and then it just never did because they never got around to the DLC because they spent the whole time trying to fix the game. So anyway, this beloved developer who gave me games that I've spent, it has to be close to 1,000 hours probably.
Oh, easily, yeah.
Playing in my youth with the Super Nintendo Sim City and then going all the way through the series, as well as the other Sim games. You brought up Sim Ant, that was great. And then all of a sudden they're just gone. And the gameplay, if you just focused on the gameplay of Sim City, the actual building of it, the aesthetic. So this is kind of a theme that I've been thinking about a lot with video games. The stuff that was hard to do, that is hard to do, they got right.
Yeah.
It is really hard to get the aesthetic of a Sim City right. And I think when we've talked about it in the past, I said it felt like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood when, like the intro to that game.
Yes.
It's just very warm and friendly and welcoming. And so they did that, but that's the hard part. And then they just glommed on this dumb always online component. I think it was for cheating, so they could verify cheaters or they could prevent pirating of the game. Yeah. And the consequence of that, idiots, is that then nobody ended up buying the game because nobody could play the game, and they had to shutter the studio a year later. So there's an entire graveyard of EA developers that they have closed because they're dumb. And of the big publishers, EA is by far, by an order of magnitude, the one that
just in terms of longevity, they've had to be the most choppiest of studio choppers.
They're just when I was in the industry, I hated them. Since I've been out of the industry, I hate them. They've just been bad. The last time I liked EA was pretty much when NHL 94 came out.
No, I thought the Orange Box was a really good value. And it's funny to mention that, yes, EA published the Orange Box.
I actually didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. That was a thing.
Wow. It blew my mind. All right, well, then since then, and that's like the one time they ever did something that was actually a good value for the consumer. They just live off Madden.
I go back and forth on EA. I'm in lockstep with you of the EA of 2024. It does literally nothing for me outside of those UFC games. Like I will dabble in, but in I think the era where EA really started to hone in on this reputation of being like one of the world's worst companies, that started in the PS3 360 and really ramped up by the end of that generation, and kind of hit like a nice rancid plateau of overall fan base appreciation. I think that EA every once in a while will put out a game that I think is really, really good. And it'll be it's always something that kind of comes out of nowhere. So they're making that it's like a remake of or maybe a whole new game, but it's Skate, and I love those Skate games.
Yeah.
And again, it's weird that those are EA games, but they are. Going back to the UFC games, they made an MMA game called EA MMA back when there was these other MMA fighters that didn't really have a home, and that was a super innovative. Even to this day, the way they map the controls, everything's done, striking and grappling's all done with analog sticks. Feels fucking awesome. It's great. I highly recommend it. And then for boxing people, they swear by Fight Night Champion.
I know Prince is a big boxing guy.
So they'll always not always, but they'll every so often come out with something where it's this is fucking road rash EA, and that there's always that element will always kind of exist. But yeah, you're 100% right. If that's 5% of the company, then
then
the rest-
95% of the time they're shutting down Maxis.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
So my developer that I miss is Maxis. And now that's been over 10 years, and we've not seen a new Sim City game. There are other developers making city builder games, but we don't have a Sim City game or really any game from them because they're gone now. That sucks.
Was Maxis, whatever, was their last game Spore, or was it a Sims sequel?
Neither. It was Sim City.
Oh, really?
Because that Spore came out in 2010, I think, or 9.
Yeah, you're right. It's
And
somewhere in
Sim
there.
City was 2013.
Okay. Wow. Well, they went out the way they came in, I guess. So like you, I love me a proper SimCity game. My all-time favorite is the Super Nintendo version, but I've probably all of the mainline SimCity games I've dabbled with the sole exception of 2013. I've never even turned it on.
You're missing out, Brian.
I'm sure.
You don't even need to be online to play it.
How convenient. My internet was down last night. It would have been the perfect game for me to play. But I've tried to get into some of those newer, like the
City Skylines.
Yeah, City Skylines. I have.
That was a Game Pass game.
It was.
That failed miserably.
It was also a PSVR 2 game, and that was something I never knew that I needed, was a VR city builder game. But turns out that's really fun and works
no better
really,
way
really
to
well.
feel like God than you're like actually overlooking it.
Hero trees, enjoy your waterways, and that is totally what that's like. I highly recommend it. Yeah. I highly recommend it. But those are good. I think that's probably the best of the bunch that I've played. I've
At least
heard
the original is.
right. Yeah, I've heard bad things about the sequel, and like they still haven't.
Huge performance issues.
Okay, and they still haven't addressed that.
No, they haven't.
God bless them. All right. Well, I'm going to put a pin in this one because I think, and by I think, I definitely know because I'm going to call the shot right now. But we're going to come back with a part 2 and talk about developers that used to really ring our bell, to quote the great Will Smith, but are no longer with us. So like and subscribe. Leave a 5-star review over there on our Spotify if that's your deal. Tell your friends about this program. It really does help. And I'll say, what do you want to do here? You want to do like some sort of a gentleman's handshake?
Oh, gentleman's handshake.
Okay, all right.
What you got?
Well, I talked about AKI. They made wrestling games, so maybe like a collar,
we
like
could do
collar and elbow, or
No, I was thinking the Hogan Warrior grapple.
the test of strength.
Yeah.
Okay. Ah!